In this video, we're going to be looking at designing your course teaching and learning sequence. So the learning outcome from this learning experience is to be able to design a course teaching and learning sequence that's aligned to your course learning outcomes, assessment and strategic priorities. Biggs and Tang remind us that good teaching supports activities that lead students to use a deep approach to learning and to the attainment of the intended learning outcomes. And it's this deep approach that we want to really focus on when we're designing our learning activities and all the learning experiences within our course. So what does this actually mean? So from the student's perspective, they really have an intention to engage meaningfully. They really have a great background knowledge, or they're wanting to gain that background knowledge. They have an ability to focus at a high conceptual level and work from first principles. And they have a genuine preference for working conceptually rather than just on little details. And from the teacher's perspective, they teach in ways that explicitly bring about the structure of a topic. They elicit active responses from students, so questioning and presenting problems and challenges. They build on what students already know. They challenge students' alternative conceptions, and also they assess for structure rather than for independent facts. They also use teaching that encourages positive learning atmospheres, and they use teaching and assessment methods that support the course aims and learning outcomes. And really the whole focus is really focusing on the student's learning. So when we're looking at the sequence of learning activities, how do we sequence our plans so that we support students to adopt a deep approach to learning? We're reminded that effective learning activities are really those that engage students to develop specific knowledge, skills and values that they need to not only succeed in assessment tasks, but also into future learning and beyond, into their professional career. So we really want learning activities or learning experiences that are intentional, meaningful and useful. And by intentional, we're talking about the ones that are explicitly linked to learning outcomes and assessment. They're meaningful because students are engaged in active, authentic and cooperative ways, and they're useful because students are applying their knowledge and skills in a new context. So once again, we're reminded of the principle of constructive alignment, where we start with the end in mind. We have our course learning outcomes, we plan our assessment, and then we plan our teaching and learning activities. And this enables our students to construct meaning through the course, through the alignment of the different features of the course and enabling their learning. So before you start designing a learning sequence, there's a few things to keep in mind. Always students first. So who are your students and what year level are they at? Is it a first or second year? Is it a capstone course, therefore you're in your third or fourth year? What is their background and prior knowledge and experience? What's the actual learning context? So what is the learning environments that you are working with? What resources do you have? What are your constraints? What domains of learning are you going to be focusing on? So what are the knowledge, skills and values and the threshold concepts and practices that you need to focus on? And what's the emphasis of the course learning outcomes? So they have already been written up at this point. So what are the main foci of those learning outcomes? Is it about describing? Is it about explaining, applying, evaluating? What's the focus of the planned assessment tasks? So they would have already been done. So what's the focus of those assessment tasks? And then what contemporary pedagogies or instructional strategies for active learning are you going to be using in this course? So they're just things to be thinking about. When you start thinking about the actual design of your learning sequence, to create a coherent sequence of learning that really supports student learning, Fink suggests these 5 parts of creating a learning sequence as part of an integrated course design. So you'd align your course learning outcomes, assessment tasks and potential activities. You'd create a thematic structure for the course. You'd select a teaching and instructional strategy, create an overall scheme of learning activities and create a weekly schedule of learning activities. And I'm going to go through those each individually now so that we see the detail behind all that process. So step 1 is really aligning your course learning outcomes assessment and the potential activities. So this grid shows you how we've recorded down some course learning outcomes on the left-hand side, we've identified how we're going to assess students' progress towards those by identifying the assessment tasks in the middle. So you could be thinking about what evidence will indicate that students have achieved this particular learning outcome. And then the last column is all about the learning activities. What are the potential things that students could do to support them achieving the assessment, which then shows that they've achieved that learning outcome? So what will the students need to be able to do to achieve this that particular learning outcome? What activities are going to support that? And you'll find that different kinds of assessment and activities are needed for different kinds of learning. So the second part is to create a thematic structure for your course. So you start looking at not only the learning experiences, but also looking at the entirety of the course. So across the course, what are the main foci for your course? So you're going to identify the important concepts or topics or themes, usually between 4 to 7 main ideas, and arrange these topics into a sequence. So your sequence will depend on your particular approach to the course. So you may be going from a simple to a complex, you might be going chronologically in your course, you might be using some fundamental principles to then some emerging principles. It doesn't really matter, just as long as you're assisting your students to create meaning through the course. So that not only helps their learning, it helps them to achieve success in the assessment and therefore meet the learning outcome. You can see the diagram on the right of the screen shows how these topics build on one another. So it should be a coherent sequence of experiences and conceptual understandings. So for each new topic, students need an introduction to the topic, so they're the white boxes, and then opportunities to apply the concepts in activities and assessment tasks, and they're the greyer boxes. And so it moves up through the different topics. The third strategy is to actually create a teaching strategy or an instructional strategy, so that you think about what are the teaching methods or approaches that you're going to be using within your course. So you identify the learning activities using the learning activities from step 1. You're going to create this teaching strategy by combining some of these activities to create a particular sequence which is coherent once again. Looking at that, you identify the combination of activities in class and outside of class. So remember that there are in-class sessions and then there's activities after the class. So for example, in the example I have below, this is a class that starts, there's some activities there, then there's some activities between that class and the next class and so on. So there might be some pre-reading for the next class or some pre-activities, or there might be a flipped approach where you're having to watch your content beforehand. So that happens over time, depending on how many classes you have for a particular topic. And strategy number 4 is to create an overall scheme of the learning activities. So you integrate, to be able to do this, you actually integrate your thematic course structure, which was step 2, and your teaching strategy, which is step 3, to create an overall scheme of learning activities. And you can see that to the right of the screen. So you're identifying the main topics, you're selecting effective sequence of learning activities, and then you're repeating for each topic. So you can see that as we move further down, you can see the different topics in the course, and then as you move across, you can see how we've got our activities in the class and outside of the class through each topic. So together, it creates an overall scheme for the learning activities. Once you've got your overarching scheme, you can actually start creating weekly schedules of your learning activities. So you can see there in the table on the right, we've got the weeks, and we've just transferred the information from the table that we had on the previous slide to this one. So we've got the class sessions, between class sessions, and so on as we go. And what you can do then is adjust the period of time of your course and the number of sessions per week. So really at this point to check back in to see what activities need to come first. So in other words, like, how is your course going to begin? What are you really going to get your students to do at the beginning? And then what activities need to come last? How would the course really end? and making sure there's working with that end in mind, making sure that you're working backwards from that, and that there's scaffolding for knowledge, for skills or practices, and also values and attitudes. So how are you going to do that through your course? And just checking in at this point to see whether that has actually translated. As an additional part to this, you can then use this template, which is where we've got our weeks, and instead of just having the classes, we've actually identified what those classes are. So for example, that class 1 was each week is going to be a lecture, then we have our between class, then there's a tutorial, then a between class, and then there's a studio for the students to do their learning in. So within that, we've actually identified specific teaching activities or teaching strategies within there that then allow you to see the flow through the actual course as it moves down. So an effective sequence clearly aligns with the learning activities to the assessment and the course learning outcomes. It also coherently scaffolds student learning for their knowledge, skills and values, and it uses a variety of active learning strategies and environments. So these are the environments here, the lecture, the tutorial and the studio, and then what are the strategies within there that you're going to use, and that will be another video. So here again on the right hand side of the screen, I've just said, well, if working from the bottom, if students need to be able to do something here at the end of the course, then what is it that students need to be able to do here at the top, at the beginning of the course? Once you've done that, you can actually transfer this grid into your course profile. It aligns to your course profile and it becomes your teaching learning activity sequence. You can also, at this point, when you're putting this grid into or this information into your online course profile template, you can actually add at that point the course learning outcome that matches to each of those activities. And that would have been aligned to the assessment tasks and the course, showing that alignment right the way through the course then. So just a reminder that as course conveners, part of your role in curriculum leadership is to ensure that your course profile has a structured summary of the learning activities. And these are, for example, the environments around lectures and tutorials, practicals, self-directed learning, and so on, and incorporating student-centred activities. So the summary as well has to be broken down into weekly teaching schedule, and it's also sequenced to demonstrate the interrelationships between learning activities. And lastly, it has to map to the learning outcomes, and you'll see that on your course profile template. So through this video, we've looked at how to actually go about designing your teaching and learning sequence. Hope you found it useful.